That's the amount of dedication this country has to Israel. Of course, it doesn't matter that he supports the AfD. He was practicing something called taqiyya. This is how they could put the Holocaust behind them, is by supporting Israel unconditionally. Germany never fully denazified. I'm subjected to like hours of interrogation. Muslim community has zero political capital in this country.
The situation in Germany is very tense for Muslims. The recent Christmas market attack has brought into focus how the political elites in the country malign Muslim voices. But it goes deeper. There is a systematic campaign to make advocating for Palestine an unlawful activity. Now, today we have the honor of inviting onto the show Palestinian journalist and activist Hebh Jamal. Hebh is an activist who's currently working on an upcoming documentary film, The Reason of State, an issue we're going to go into, Germany's war on Palestinians. Hebh Jamal, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to The Thinking Muslim.
Right, Salam, thank you so much for having me.
Jazakallah khair. Actually, this is a timely conversation, but I have to say, over the last year, I've had so many Muslims from Germany who've contacted me asking me to address the general situation of Palestinian activism in Germany. So, I think it's a long time coming, and Jazakallah khair for joining us. Let's start with the Magdeburg Christmas market attack, which we now we found out was carried out by a Saudi ex-Muslim Islamophobe who, from all accounts, supported the AfD. At least that's what his social media accounts suggest. Just bring us up to speed with what the fallout has been for the Muslim community there in Germany.
Yeah, so first off, I mean, we were all incredibly shocked about the attack that took place, a few days ago. And of course, the immediate question was what was the identity of the attacker? Fortunately, it was an Arab, a Saudi national. But the story, of course, as you just pointed out, wasn't entirely as they wanted it to be, right? This guy was an ex-Muslim. Well, I prefer the term atheist because I feel like the concept of being an ex-Muslim, you just revolve around your hatred of your former religion, which I find incredibly weird. So this atheist Islamophobe who is pro-Israel, who supports the AfD and right-wing extremists, supports Elon Musk and all of these other, right-wing nationals. And of course, now the conversation has shifted, right? And now it's oh, this guy isn't an Islamist, he did it for other reasons. But the general consensus of a lot of people within the political elite and what the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, what they're pushing now is, of course, that he was an Islamist. Like, it doesn't matter, actually, what his intentions were, what his motives were. His personal gripe with the German state was apparently based on his social media posts, was that they were allowing Islamists to enter the country. So he's referring to Syrians and other migrants, and they're purposefully not allowing ex-Muslims and apostates and other people from the Middle East. It was a very peculiar gripe against the German state. And it really seems more of like a paranoia and the sort of schizophrenia rather than anything that makes any logical sense. However, for the grand scheme of things, it actually doesn't really matter what his motives are. And what matters is his identity. And his identity is an Arab. And what the AfD is now pushing is that this was an Islamist attack. And we have to kick all of these Arabs and all of these migrants out of our country. Of course, it doesn't matter that he supports the AfD. It doesn't matter that he, basically supports everything she's saying. What matters is, again, his identity. But there's something interesting also that is taking place. And it's not that, it's totally disregarding his social media posts. It's this concept that the right-wing media, or some political pundits, and of course the online community, is that he was practicing something called taqiyya, right? And I really haven't heard of this concept until recently. Of course, I've heard of you're not, if you're in some sort of extreme political pressure, you could lie in certain situations. It's not haram. But no, how Germans are now interpreting this is that this guy, this attacker, was practicing taqiyya, the act of lying, to pursue his political goals, and his jihadist goals to attack non-Muslims at a Christmas market. So that's the narrative that is being pushed now by a lot of people, including Elon Musk, by the way. He completely went with this and said, no, this guy is a jihadist, he's an Islamist, and the only solution for Germany is to elect the AfD, to elect these essentially neo-Nazi party. Of course, the mainstream political parties in Germany are afraid. They know that this is picking up steam, and so the entire political spectrum for the last, um, honestly, over the last few years, have been shifting entirely to the right, whether it's SPD, CDU, FDP, all of the, even Die Linke, the leftist parties, they're all shifting to the right in order to, grasp at this, right wing trend that is picking great steam in Europe and the United States, and honestly, everywhere in the entire world, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I want to pick up on the point you make about Elon Musk. I mean, why do you think that outsiders, I mean, it's often the case that German politics is very parochial and the outside world doesn't really know too much about the ins and outs of German politics. But why do you think someone like Elon Musk has picked up on AfD? In fact, it was on the day of the attack, just before the attack, that he seemed to tweet his support for the party. So what's this sort of global interaction? Where does it come from?
Well, he's obviously not stupid. I mean, he's not very knowledgeable in what takes place inside Germany. I think, that part, I'm pretty confident in. But he's not stupid. I think what these world leaders are now focusing on is trying to get sort of all of these major world powers on a similar platform, right? So now Trump, there was this attack on the New York City train station the other day, where this immigrant essentially, lit up someone on fire, and that person died. And now, of course, the rhetoric is is kicking out all illegal migrants, and not even illegal, right, at this point, like kick everyone out of the country. And of course, if there's a narrative that is similar to that, is similar to the one that they're pushing in the United States, it's of course favorable. It's not very surprising that right-wing neo-fascists are sort of banding together wherever they may be. But his focus on Germany is interesting because you know, uh, the AfD isn't it always they've had conversations about banning the political party just a few years ago. Like this is something very, very frightening. And I think a lot in the political elite are also, concerned that the AfD is making major strides. And of course, Elon Musk is capitalizing on that, and anything to sort of gain more allies and gain more support for Trump and for their right-wing neo-fascist agenda is, of course, welcome.
Yeah, the AfD is making ground in German politics. Elections are coming up, and it seems like, as you implied in an answer to your question, in answer to a previous question, it suggests that AfD politics is now becoming the terrain that many of the political parties are trying to move on to. Um, why, in particular, is Islam such a major focus for the AfD? Like, bring us up to speed with their virulent Islamophobia. What's behind that?
I mean, okay, so there's of course a few things. I just want to kind of go back a little bit and piggyback on how I what I meant by all these parties moving to the right. So now, just last year, Olaf Scholz, the SPD, the Socialist Party in Germany, leader of the Socialist Party in Germany, essentially signed the biggest anti-migration bill in this country's history. Right, he signed the biggest anti-migration bill to the point where cut back extremely on benefits for migrants and asylum seekers, and you know uh, uh, people who are seeking refugee status. They're even considering building asylum centers in other countries, and so, for example, you would have someone who wants to seek asylum, right, to go to Germany. They wouldn't come here and wait. No, the asylum center would be in a country like Albania or in an African country. They'd pay that country to keep those migrants there until their application process is finished, and that of course can take years. So this is what I mean. Like Olaf Scholz, and people within STU and others have consistently been talking about keeping migrants at bay, not wanting migrants to enter the country. And if this is, and if we know anything from history, if it's of course not a rational fear. Of course, the major concerns are things like the economy. Currently, Germany, one of the major problems is that Germany is carrying the EU when it comes to the economy. They are subsidizing a lot of European countries that are not necessarily providing much within the EU framework. So this is one of the platforms that the AfD is actually is building on, is leaving the EU or dramatically changing Germany's involvement in it. So major issues, like real issues that people are experiencing, like the economy, like social benefits, are the sort of focus points. But there's, of course, there's another side to this. And I really believe that one of the major conversation shifters around attacking migrants has been the overwhelming presence of pro-Palestinian protests and solidarity across the country. And now they view this as a wave of imported anti-Semitism, as they call it. So it's a very ironic thing where Germany is now claiming that they are experts on anti-Semitism. And it's not that, right-wing fascists are, anti-Semitic. No, it's the concept of imported anti-Semitism, where these Arab migrants and immigrant communities have hostilities towards Israel. They hate Jews, and that's where the anti-Semitism is coming. And so, actually, one of the first indications that Olaf Scholz wanted to attack migration was in a conversation with the Spiegel, like a German newspaper, German magazine, where they asked him, "Oh, what do you think about all these anti-Semitic protests that are taking place on the streets?" And his response was, "Oh, yeah, we need to essentially kick out all of these, these unwanted people." So this is where it's all sort of interconnected. And I could even give you a few examples. Please cut me off if I'm rambling too much, but another example is them literally changing the citizenship test to include questions about Israel, include questions about Israeli football teams, and about Israeli holidays. Like it's very much you know and if you say you deny Israel's right to exist, you will not get your citizenship status, and that's what we've seen in a few cases actually so far. And there's other cases where activists have been active, going to protests, and they would be refugees, right? So refugees attending protests, if they get arrested, that is grounds to revoke refugee status. And there are some cases where, for example, Germany can't just send someone back, so they don't have any sort of relations, like, for example, with Lebanon, or before the downfall of Assad, Syria. So what they would do is give them toleration status. So it's called Duldung status in German. So no social benefits, no working papers. Essentially, you're living in limbo in Germany. You don't have any papers, but you just can't leave, so you're just tolerated. Um, and yeah, and this is sort of, so when we say, "Oh, what is why is the right-wing parties so, have so much hatred of Islam? Oh, why do they, hate migrants so much?" It's really all interconnected. As soon as there is any sort of, either disturbance or political activity from the Muslim community or otherwise, or of course an unfortunate uh, just attack from a lunatic, it's all becomes jumbled together and everything sort of becomes interconnected, and there's no separation between the two.
That's fascinating, and there seems to be a very strong connection between their antipathy towards Muslims and Palestinian activism, and we've seen that over the past year. I would like I would like to ask you about the reason of state. This idea that the modern German state is deeply connected with the survival and the existence of Israel. Can you explain, like, why that? What is that connection? And is it, I suppose we know that Germany is very sensitive about Israel because of its horrific genocidal past. But is that what is pushing a lot of it, or driving a lot of this anti-Palestinian rhetoric?
So the reason of state, or German, the Deutsche Staatsräson, uh is a sort of a declaration. It's not a legally binding concept. It's not written anywhere in the Constitution. But so let me just sort of say what it is. In 2008, Angela Merkel had a speech at the Israeli Knesset where she, stood there and basically said that Israel's national security is Germany's reason of state. So Israel's protection and their, the security apparatus is of great concern to the German government. And, as I said, this isn't a legally binding statement. It's not written anywhere in the Constitution, but it has essentially become a fact of life in Germany. Like it's reiterated within every major political decision concerning Israel, concerning Palestine. It is, when October 7th happened, that was the first thing that Olaf Scholz said was we stand in solidarity with Israel and their national security is our reason of state, reiterated time and time and time and again. Um, so, really over the last, decade and a half, that has been the concrete rhetoric that has infiltrated German society. Of course, well, but that's not really that's not necessarily, how Germany's become so pro-Israel. It has taken place ever since post-World War II. They've established great relationships with the state of Israel for decades now. And their relationship with the Palestinians um, have been increasingly hostile. I mean, ever since, for example, refugees from Lebanon came in the 80s to Germany, Palestinian refugees escaping, a civil war, they, again, like I mentioned this previously, they were not given any sort of refugee status because Palestine was not considered a state. It was not considered a political conflict because it wasn't a state. So how are these Palestinians refugees? It wasn't, it, 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 it wasn't any sort of logic, I guess, to the German government. So instead, they gave them this toleration status, and people would have suitcases by their doors waiting to be deported. But of course, Lebanon didn't want those Palestinian refugees back, and so Berlin and just the rest of Germany has become the uh the essentially the it has the most Palestinians in the diaspora outside of the Middle East and South America. So it's, if we're talking about Europe or we're talking about Palestinians, that's where the most Palestinians are. Um, and of course, those Palestinians that I mentioned that had toleration status, they have grew up in poverty and isolation. Um, and the situation is of course a little better, but that plays really really much into the dynamics that are taking place today in Germany. So it's not just from the reason of state in 2008. It has been this sort of hostility towards Palestinians have been taking place for decades, and it's over this false concept of of atonement, right? Of, after what happened in World War II, after Germany massacred 6 million Jewish people, they think that if they support Israel, if they support the Israeli state, and Israel, of course, saying that it speaks for all Jewish people around the world, that is their easy cop out. That's how they can enter the world stage as this big capitalist power, this leading force in the European Union. This is how they could put the Holocaust behind them, is by supporting Israel unconditionally. And Palestinians have been this annoying thing that they've been trying to squash under the rug as much as they can. And we have to remember, Germany never fully denazified. Like it's a myth that they've reconciled with their past and have have really grappled with their colonialist mindset. That's just not the case. Germany has always been seen as this poster child of how to rebuild oneself after horrific crime, and the United States needs to learn from Germany, and et cetera, and it's just a lie. It's not what happened. Um, Germany needed to rebuild its image, and in order to do that, they essentially took everything that the Israeli state said was of benefit to the Jewish people without contradiction.
Yeah, tell me about your activism and Palestinian activism in general, because we in the UK, it's tense, and the authorities often claim a lot. They say the same about anti-Semitism and use for similar tropes, but generally speaking, we're pretty free to engage in political activism for Palestine. We would expect the same from Germany as a liberal country. What's been your experience?
Not good, not good. I mean, so Germany is not just, silencing pro-Palestinian protesters and censoring them and criminalizing them. They're contributing directly to the genocide. So they're the second largest arms exporter to Israel behind the United States. So they are aiding and abetting genocide at every point. They have become essentially the propaganda wing for the Israeli state. There's very little dispute or argument against Zionist propaganda within the German media. In fact, they just take everything that the Israeli state says as fact without contradiction, without question. So you have to understand that, when I mentioned the reason of state earlier, when I mentioned that they are very much adopt this concept of, it is very taboo to be critical of Israel. I'm talking within every major political and educational institution that exists in this country. Palestinians and pro-Palestinians, they can't even get an event space in Germany. In 2019, there was an anti-BDS resolution that was passed, within the Bundestag, that says that it is it's not illegal. Again, it's not a legally binding document, but in order to prevent anti-Semitism, it's frowned upon by any institution to give space or public funding or anything towards pro-Palestinian organizations. There was another resolution that was passed earlier this year for the protection of Jewish life in Germany. It reiterates the same thing. Do not institutions, and including educational institutions and universities, should not be giving space to pro-Palestinian groups. Even clubs within their own university, students within their own university, are not allowed to have room or event spaces. And of course, again, this is not a legally binding document either, but it gives political backing to institutions to push out and isolate pro-Palestinian activists and essentially criminalize them, even though this isn't a law. So my experience has been tough. Of course, other people have it worse, but I I have been investigated by the German federal police for my activism. I'm I currently have this security alert that is on my name and on my husband's name. Every single time I leave the country or enter the country, I'm subjected to like hours of interrogation and back searches, and uh yeah, even searching of my material, and if they want my devices as well. So uh that's sort of my reality that's taking place now. One border security officer managed to sort of tell me why, because usually they don't tell you why. And he said it's because the alert that was written was because I was being radicalized in the direction of anti-Israel hate and anti-Semitism, and that I question Israel's right to exist. So that's the amount of, you know that's the amount of dedication this country has to Israel. I could give you so many examples. My friend and colleague who works with me in the same organizing group, Zaytuna, and from where we are in Mannheim, uh, he at a protest said, and I quote, that he advocates for a free Palestine for all people, regardless of religions and denominations, from the river to the sea. Now, he said that, right? And he was found guilty by the District Court of Karlsruhe for incitement to hatred and anti-Semitism. And he
Really?
and it's a felony charge. So he even charged over 7,000 euro fine over this one sentence because and it was a whole bunch of accusations. He relativized the Holocaust. It was incitement to hatred and violence and hatred of Jewish people, all because he contextualized the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," and that's it's absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't uphold in any court of law, but here we are, where none of these documents that, are supposedly saying that all of these things are illegal, none of them are legally binding. And yet our courts, our judges, public prosecutors are finding grounds to find uh, the pro-Palestinian activists, guilty of these baseless accusations. It has been 440 something days of genocide, and the German state refuses to see its faults. Amnesty Germany said that Israel is conducting a genocide. Human Rights Watch said Israel is conducting a genocide. The United Nations says Israel is conducting a genocide. The ICC is issuing an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and Germany says that it might not be able to arrest them. Why? Because of Germany's relationship with Israel and its historical responsibility towards Israel. It it does, Germany has like paraded itself as this upholder of international law post World War II. I mean, the ICC was sort of created to put war criminals um and yeah, to prosecute and to be able to hold these people accountable. And here is Germany supporting another genocide, refusing to abide by institutions that were created due to horrific crimes, such as what Hitler did. So so yeah, I could go on. I mean, I was disinvited by a university. Um, a university professor invited me, and the university itself disinvited me, and canceled the event because of AfD politicians and right wing Zionist groups who said that I support terror and I'm a Hamas fanatic and a Jew hater, and that was sort of what was rolled in every major mainstream media. Um, we had an event with Greta Thunberg a few weeks ago, and I spoke at the event with her for over 2 hours, and not a single quote of mine was attributed to me. It was just, yeah, the moderator was a Jew hater and um, Israel hater and terror supporter. So it there's no ethical journalistic standards here. There is no um, any sort of pushback, you know, from these baseless accusations. And really, what happens is there's sort of pro-Palestinian activists are living in a sort of sub-society. I mean, we are on the streets every single, and in some places like Berlin, really every other day. In my city, like every other week, where we're consistently on the streets since last year, and instead of engaging with us, it's again the same sort of criminalization and um, hateful rhetoric. I want to sort of go back to something I missed before when talking about how this this really impacts the Muslim community.
Yes.
I want to reiterate that the Muslim community has zero political capital in this country. It's not like the UK. It's not like the United States that has some sort of legal institutions like Care New York, Care, um, or other human rights groups that advocate for Muslims in the country. There is zero political capital. There is nothing that Muslims are contributing to politically. They are only spoken to if they want to condemn something. Like this is the interaction that Muslims in this state have, or it's or it's interacting to have like these counter-violence extremist programs like within their communities, and to figure out how to entrap Muslims, and to weed out radical people from uh, the community. That's the amount of interaction that the state and Muslim groups have. So I can tell you that not a single mosque in all of Germany, not a single Muslim institution. There are Muslim institutions, but there isn't any political Muslim institutions. None of them mobilized for Palestine. None of them. And I always was, I was very angry over this. I always felt very isolated. What you see on the streets is not necessarily majority Muslim. Actually, it's more leftist and secular, and other types of activists who are standing side by side, and with Palestinians. It's of course Arabs and Muslims as well, but no Muslim institution, no political Muslim institution is organizing that. That's majority leftist, secular, pro-Palestinian organizations. My group included. We are Muslims involved, but it's also a lot of non-Muslims involved as well. And that's how we've been reliant and pushing against this genocide. It's not from Muslim institutions, and I sort of want to explain why. Um, every major religious institution, you know, uh, every religious institution, etc., is sort of publicly funded in Germany. They get tax cuts. Like, it's it's similar to how it functions everywhere else, but in Germany, nearly everything is publicly funded. This is something that's interesting, because I've always been a proponent for publicly funded education, publicly funded institutions. Like, it should be, it shouldn't, things like this shouldn't be private, right? It shouldn't be for profit. However, in Germany, it has created a complete, like, homogeneous, like, political infrastructure, to the point where, if you have any sort of politics, or if you say anything sort of political in your Friday sermons or anything like that, your mosque gets shut down. Just no questions asked, shut down. There was the Islamic Institute of Hamburg, this beautiful Shia mosque in Hamburg, that was shut down, maybe like 6 months ago, because some of the constituents were like pro Hezbollah. That was the basis of shutting down a mosque. Like, that was the absolute, because they, and apparently now all the constituents support terror, and any constituent or any board member that was officially associated with the mosque is criminal proceedings against them right now. And they've shut down a few other mosques throughout the country since then, because there was seemingly support for anything pro-Palestinian related. It's Yeah, so of course Muslims are afraid, and Muslim scholars and Muslim, imams or whatever, are also afraid. So I can tell you, here in Mannheim, I have not seen a single Friday sermon, a like Jummah prayer, dedicated to Palestine over the last 400 days, because of this fear, because any mishap, they will be shut down. And a lot of these communities, and a lot of Muslim student groups also, by the way, this is another thing, Muslim student groups within universities that have less to lose than these institutions, all want to prioritize having space for their religion, for community, which I can understand. um I don't agree, but I can understand. So yeah, so nothing would be mobilized.
I mean that's terrible. I mean, what you're describing there seems almost fascistic in many ways, because you're
Just
you're creating a society where there can be no political outlet for your frustrations. Is there any pushback from Muslim groups and Muslim community organizations? I mean, often we find that among student populations, there often is pushback when the heavy hand of the state is present. Do you find that? I mean, you've stated there that student societies are as silent as the major institutions, but
Muslim student societies, like,
yes, yeah.
this is also the difference. I can tell you, there has been very successful occupations that mimic the student student movement in the United States and Germany, like occupations of building that have lasted hours and hours, and encampments that have lasted days. But again, not for Muslim groups. A lot of Muslims are involved, but not primarily for Muslim student groups. I could just say though that I'm not necessarily 100% in tune to everything the Muslim community is doing. There there's a lot of Muslims in Germany. There's a lot,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
Turkish community also in Germany. So I'm not necessarily 100% sure if there's significant pushback, but I could tell you that the pushback that is taking place is from pro-Palestinian and anti-racist
I
organizations.
mean, that's such a shame. Now, is it because of this aura, this atmosphere of fear that the state has deliberately created? Is that why the Muslim community is silent, or is the silence more deeper? I mean, is there a quietism, an interpretation of the Deen that makes them more reconciled with sort of not speaking out on Palestine?
Well, if there is any sort of interpretation of the deed, I feel like sometimes we find that we try to, justify how we exist, and we use our religion to do that. I mean, I don't think Muslims are different than other groups in that regard in terms of how they utilize faith to make sense of their circumstance. I do have to say, though, that I really believe that it is fear. The German government has been merciless when it comes to things like this. I know many people that had their houses raided that are under, severe surveillance. I can tell you I'm under very significant surveillance, so I can't imagine being a part of, being a leader within a Muslim uh community and not being under the same type of extreme surveillance. I'm sure they're being incredibly careful. And a part of that fear and not wanting your house raided and not wanting to be seen as an extremist and not a radical and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is of course staying silent on Palestine. And I don't know what the solution to this is. I really don't. Like, what should we just not have mosques and community spaces and everyone go on the streets? I feel like the street could be your community space in my personal opinion, but a lot of people don't see the same, and they have to play the long game, and that's what I feel the initial gut reaction is to a lot of religious communities. And I wanna say that a lot of these people, they got to where they are because of how much they've been criminalized in the past. So I don't wanna undermine their efforts as well. They've tried, over the last decades, probably more than me. And I don't want my critique to sound insensitive of what they've gone through. But this is just where we are now. Muslims have been consistently under attack in this country. Just yesterday there was this report in Berlin where this man wanted to light someone's apartment on fire, and the police said that it was over xenophobic motives. So we could see it's just gonna get worse. AfD, leading with misinformation that this man that did the Christmas attack was an Islamist, was a jihadist and a radical terrorist it doesn't, facts just don't matter anymore. It doesn't matter what you say, um, and it's gonna be a lot worse, and it's a scary time actually to live in Germany.
Okay, can I then ask you about pushback from the wider society? I mean, is there for example, in the UK, even though the press and the government and the opposition are very much pro-Israel, the sentiment amongst the majority of Brits is pro-Palestine, and it's growing, especially amongst younger. I'm talking about wider non-Muslim youth. There's a plurality now of people who are pro-Palestinian, and pro-Palestinian voices are growing in the mainstream as well. Is there no such movement in Germany?
Well, I think I really do believe that the general public is getting there. I really do think so. I don't wanna say all of the stuff that we've been doing is in vain. Like, I want to believe that people are responding, and I could tell you students are responding. Like, I can tell you, There is now a pro-Palestinian organization in nearly every single state in Germany. There are students for Palestine groups that have grew enormously since the genocide started. Um, and this amount of support and this public debate hasn't taken place in this way for decades in this country. So it's I think it really is impacting. There was a report that said that a majority of Germans, I think 60% or something, disagree with arms exports to Israel. So even that, like nothing to do with Palestine, nothing to do with people just don't want to send weapons for war, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Israel. It's that much. Even the German government is not necessarily listening to its people. And this was, and of course, these studies take place every so often. It doesn't necessarily say to the sentiment that they have towards Palestinians in particular. I find that I think it's really hard for Germans to humanize Palestinians. But just that particular concept of just not wanting to send weapons and create more instability and have our, have Germany's arm everywhere like the United States, that also is not taken seriously either.
Yeah, I mean, that's very very troubling actually what you see there. I mean, I'm going to be inshallah interviewing Sheikh Omar Suleiman, who of course has been very vocal on Palestine, and it's a question I think I should ask him. How much should we balance these long-term goals of the Muslim community and their comfort and their religiosity with the immediate genocide and the need to speak out against these atrocities? I mean, I'm with you. I'm in favor of speaking out and being far more vocal, but it's a tough decision, I suppose, for lots of community organizations to make.
Yeah, I mean, I have, I know that it's different for my husband and I because we lost a lot of people then. Um,
You have
you know,
family in Gaza, I remember.
yeah, yeah. So my husband's from Gaza. I've been to Gaza in 2022. A lot of beautiful memories and a lot of beautiful people that are no longer with us and can no longer, memories that can no longer exist. And my husband and I were, of course, in a very different camp. Um, we are, we have family with people that use their faith for complete, you know, of course, deep using their faith for deep comfort, like, faced with billions and billions of dollars of just and countries wanting to destroy and maim and butcher, um, their family, their home. So my husband and I, of course, sort of we're at a place where it doesn't necessarily matter what the German state does to us in particular. Um, what matters, by the way, there's nothing that the German state can do that is worse than what's taking place in Gaza. And I really wish that Muslims sort of get over themselves in this concept of wanting to feel comfortable. Like, how do you want to feel comfortable exactly? Like, there's no way for us to feel comfortable in this country that doesn't want to take you as you are, unless you take off the headscarf, unless you denounce everything, you know, unless you build your entire life to look like them and think like them and act like them. Uh, and of course, it doesn't matter how much you assimilate. My husband's a doctor. He works for German society as much as he possibly can. And to the outside world, it actually doesn't matter what you do to contribute. You, at the end of the day, are are not on the same, societal level as Germans. And I think we just need to I really believe that we can find a lot of beauty in fighting these oppressive systems. We can also find a lot of faith in fighting these oppressive systems. Unfortunately, me personally, I have been very much isolated from the Muslim community here, and before even in the United States. I was very much involved, and it was this it was this conscious decision to play into, the political landscape of the country, to ignore the deeply oppressed, to side with things like police officers and state infrastructure over, um, the 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 poor and downtrodden. So I've always had these conflicts, and they've become more pronounced here, but they exist everywhere. They, of course, exist everywhere, and people want to find safety over um, political victory, I guess. And I can understand it, but I vehemently disagree with it.
No, I think what your position is probably the better position when it comes to our relationship with God and with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So I'm with you there. I suppose my final question for you is, how can we help from outside? I mean, is there anything we can do as Muslims from around the world who may have a more freer hand to speak to help the situation there in Germany, apart from just highlighting, as you've eloquently done today, highlighting the horrible situation that you find yourselves in?
Nothing. Like, don't do anything for us. I think that, we'll be fine. Like, I think, of course, it's fearful and there's censorship and there's criminalizing of pro-Palestinians, but it's again nothing compared to what's going on in Palestine. It's nothing compared to what our brothers and sisters and family and people are facing. And I would much rather prefer the energy going towards fighting that, and than, dealing with our problems here. We'll figure it out. And I think that, I think that the debate is shifting. I think that the reaction, and I want this, I want this to finally be said, is sort of the fascist reaction to pro-Palestinian activists, to people on the ground demanding change and demanding accountability, is because there's something happening. You're not going to have a fascist reaction if nothing is happening. If everything is the status quo, you're not going to have a shift to the right, right? You only have this. You only have these neo-Nazi sentiments and people wanting to criminalize Palestinians and say you can't say from the river to the sea and all of these things um, because you're doing it, right? And I think that, every major push, every activist movement faces extreme repression. That has been the case throughout history, and we're no different. Palestine is no different than what takes place before and what's going to take place after. And I think it's when we understand how Palestine is situated in world history and you know as a whole is a dehumanization of a people and forces propagating towards that dehumanization. Um, so it's that's obviously not hard. That's obviously not easy to fight.
Hebh Jamal, thank you so much for your time today. Jazakallah.
Sorry.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.